What's up, beautiful people? My name is Zack, and welcome to another episode of Zack Makes Movies, the channel where we talk about...
You guessed it, Frank Stallone.
Well, folks, from the Great Plains of Texas to the over-insulated homes of the UK, it's been hotter than a penguin in a pan fry on this sunny Independence Day. That's right, summer is in full swing, and today I wanted to talk about one of my all-time favorite filmmakers and a personal inspiration of mine, the undisputed king of the summer blockbuster, the one and only Steven Spielberg. Spielberg was born in 1946 in Cincinnati, Ohio, but he spent most of his formative years in Phoenix, Arizona, where he made the Sonoran Desert his personal backyard studio. This is explored to great effect by the man himself in his most recent movie, the semi-autobiographical story of The Fabelmans, which I think is one of his finest films in the last 20 years, going all the way back to a certain 2002 picture, which we'll talk about a little later. Spielberg is a one-of-a-kind director, right up there with Scorsese, and arguably even bigger when it comes to epitomizing what a Hollywood director looks like to you mortal fools in the general public. Whether popping up in cartoon cameo for his own creation Animaniacs, or as the auteur behind the movie within the movie of Austin Powers and Goldmember.
Well, I can't believe Sir Steven Spielberg, the grooviest filmmaker in the history of cinema, is making a movie about my life. Very shagadelic, baby!
It's no wonder why even the laymen know our pal Stevie, when the vast majority of directors go largely under the radar of public perception. I saw Jaws when I was at that perfect age that felt too young at the time, which is the exact sweet spot to experience nightmare-inducing cinema. There was nothing scarier to me than those underwater shots in the shark's POV, except for the overwater shots, when you didn't know where he'd pop up next. Jaws was a novel written by the great Peter Benchley. It's one of the clearest examples, in my opinion, of a book that was absolutely bodied by the movie. In the novel, there's a whole subplot about Hooper having an affair with Brody's wife, which had to be cut once casting took all the realism out of that. Just kidding, Richie. I'm sure you get plenty of action.
My husband tells me you're in sharks.
One of the things that makes Jaws so suspenseful in a visual storytelling medium is the fact that the shark goes largely unseen for the vast majority of the film. Compare that to nearly any other shark movie made since, where that isn't at all the case.
We're gonna find a way to get out of here. First, we're gonna seal off this.
But that was not the original plan. Spielberg had intended to use the animatronic far more in the movie. There was just one problem. The shark sank.
What did you do with your non-working shark?
Well, the first mistake with the shark was they made a big mistake and they built it for fresh water.
What's the difference?
Well, electrolysis is a major problem when you get salt into all the machinery, into the electrical system.
Sure.
And we had the shark on a huge 90-foot platform, 30 feet underwater. The shark came up tail first. It just came up tail first, and it was like it was like a 25-foot moon.
Ultimately, he decided to use the iconic barrels to depict the location of the shark, which ended up working tremendously in his favor. Bruce was great, but the implication of the shark was even better.
Nothing but open ocean. There's nowhere for me to run.
Now, when I was younger, anytime I'd see a movie like Jaws or Jurassic Park, I'd want to make my own shark movie. I'd want to make my own dinosaur movie. And I've talked in a previous video about how poorly that went. But there is a right and wrong way to pay homage to a classic film, and nobody to my mind has done it better in recent years than Jordan Peele with his 2022 sci-fi western, Nope. Obviously, there are other inspirations that went into that film, but the biggest and clearest of them all is Jaws. However, Nope isn't about a shark. It's about an alien. But instead of an ocean to hide the hungry predator, Peele uses a cloud. And instead of barrels to imply the off-screen threat, he uses flags. Ah, but Zack, you're asking, if Nope is an homage to Jaws, then what is Jaws an homage to? Well, my handsome friend, I'm glad you asked. Because before Jaws, there was a TV movie called Duel. Duel is a simple film about a man on a road trip played by Dennis Weaver who makes the grave mistake of overtaking an 18-wheeler on the open highway. For the remaining 89 minutes, he's pursued by the driver, who, by the way, is never shown once, not once, in the entire movie. In Duel, the truck is the shark, and to a further extent, the truck is the barrel, and the driver is the shark. But what needs no speculation is the fact that Duel was Steven Spielberg's very first feature film, and remains highly underrated to this day. After Duel, he directed his first theatrically released film in Sugarland Express, which was sort of his take on a Bonnie and Clyde story. But, clearly, the third time was the charm, as Jaws is undoubtedly his first masterpiece.
He was coming back from the island of Tinian to Lady, just delivered the bomb, the Hiroshima bomb.
Jaws was the very first summer blockbuster. It paved the way for every year since, and the effect it had on Hollywood isn't going away anytime soon.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Another great novelist, Michael Crichton, came up with the truly brilliant concept of extracting the blood of ancient mosquitoes, isolated in fossilized amber, as a means to collect DNA to reproduce the long-dead dinosaurs. This might be the single most genius piece of pseudoscience in any fiction novel, and apparently, it wasn't that far off the mark. But ultimately, it was Spielberg who brought it to life in his sci-fi horror masterpiece, Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park was made in 1993, at the exact time he was working on another of his classics, Schindler's List, which is something I'm not sure any other filmmaker has accomplished before or since. Sure, there are directors who've made 2 films in a year, but not 2 of the greatest films of all time, and certainly not 2 movies with such differing tone and subject matter. See, Jurassic Park is about dinosaurs coming back to life, and Schindler's List is not.
It's Hebrew from the Talmud. It says, whoever saves one life saves the world entire.
Spielberg was so troubled on the set of Schindler's List dealing with such depressing subject matter that he'd call his friend Robin Williams on a daily basis to cheer him up. And now, anytime I think of Robin Williams, I think of the Holocaust, which is what I think he would have wanted. Jurassic Park paved the way for CGI, or computer-generated imagery. Before 1993, no other film had come close to making the new technology even remotely believable. We were still better off with the old Harryhausen method of stop motion until Spielberg brought together a team that would combine groundbreaking CGI effects with in-camera animatronics, including Phil Tippett, Stan Winston, and Dennis Muren, and the result in my mind is better than anything we have today, some 30 years later. However, what's really lacking today is the grounded realism of the era. The story, the writing, the seriousness with which the subject matter was treated by the all-star team of actors. That's what sold Jurassic Park. The effects just stuck the landing. There's a lot of reasons why the Jurassic World movies don't really work for me, but the biggest problem is tone. Generally, that's going to be inevitable when you try to reboot something decades later. More often than not, the sensibilities of the era have changed enough that it's an uphill battle just to try and recapture the energy of the time when the film was originally made. Of course, there are exceptions. Mad Max, Top Gun, and Blade Runner were all rebooted in spectacular fashion without missing a beat. But when I watch Jurassic World, I get the impression that even the filmmakers are painfully aware that their creation doesn't live up to the original. Yeah, what could have given me that idea?
That first park was legit. You know, I have a lot of respect for it. They didn't need these genetic hybrids. They just needed dinosaurs, real dinosaurs. That's kind of enough.
Please don't wear it again.
But I will say, for better or worse, as a quick sidebar, in 2012 I got to attend a screening of a small indie film called Safety Not Guaranteed, starring Aubrey Plaza and Jake Johnson, which was directed by a fairly unknown filmmaker named Colin Trevorrow. Cut to 3 years later and he's directing on one of the biggest franchises of all time. So that just goes to show that anything is possible in this business if you keep at it.
And the Oscar goes to... Kiwi Clark.
I remember being in 10th grade and our geography teacher didn't feel like teaching for the day, so he threw on a little movie called Raiders of the Lost Ark. Raiders of the Lost Ark actually might be Spielberg's best movie. It's one of the best adventure films ever made. It's non-stop fun, thrills, action, comedy, all the way throughout without ever feeling contrived, which is a hell of a feat considering what an insane plot the first movie and subsequent sequels had. Indiana Jones is top 5 most iconic film characters of all time. Harrison Ford is untouchable in that role. The first 10 minutes are a filmmaking masterclass in tone setting, world building, and character introduction, taking the pulp adventure serials of the 40s and recontextualizing them for a 1980s audience. There's so many great moments, from the swordsman duel which abruptly ends in a comedic gunshot, which by the way was similarly to Jaws a result of a problem on set. Initially there was meant to be an entire sword fight, which would have been fun, but not as iconic. Temple of Doom was a disappointing follow-up to a lot of people. I am not one of them. I'm a big fan of big swings in cinema, and boy did he crack the bat on that one. Just like with the first movie, the entire opening sequence is pure adrenaline all the way through. From the cinematic dance number that starts it off, the backdrop of our hero nearly poisoning himself, to jumping out of a crashing plane on a raft, which I'm sure will land safely in calm waters. The plot is grade A bonkos.
I'm telling you, this guy's bonkos. He really is.
But God bless Oscar winner Ke Huy Quan for keeping the whole thing together as a fan favorite short round.
Step on it.
Okie dokie, Dr. Jones, hold on to your potatoes.
Who obviously should have been brought back in another installation, say in place of a completely crowbarred-in character who was supposedly a relative the whole time. I don't know, I'm sure they can think of something. The Last Crusade is not my favorite of the 3, but there's a moment in it which has always stuck with me through my own screenwriting. It's the very end, as Indy is trying to reach the Holy Grail, having just seen the last person to do so fall to their death, but he just can't help himself. The Grail is the one thing he's been looking for his entire life, or so he thinks, because just then, his much absent father, played by the iconic Sean Connery, who is equally eager to get his hands on the Grail, stops him with 3 simple words. Let it go! And Indy is reminded that what he's really always wanted is his father's approval. So he lets the Grail go and allows his father to pull him back up to safety. This movie sucks you in within seconds. The Omaha Beach scene is so uniquely haunting. It picks you up and drops you right into the middle of these brave young soldiers with an anxiety-inducing low angle that won't let you see over the sides of the boat. The sound design is unreal. The coughing you can hear as the sequence begins would feel like a mistake in any other film, but here it instantly makes the world real, and you feel it. You feel the bullets zipping underwater. You feel the waves lapping at the camera where a face would be, struggling to catch a breath while dodging death at every second. And then, it all goes quiet. Tom Hanks is stunned as he can do nothing but watch the carnage all around him. The cinematography is some of Spielberg's best, helmed by the great Janusz Kaminski. The movie is as good as it gets. As hard as it is to watch, it's even harder to look away. I do think it was maybe not the best idea to hold a screening for PTSD-stricken World War II vets, but it's the thought that counts. And you can't talk about Steven Spielberg without mentioning his collaborative partner of nearly 50 years, the one and only John Williams. John Williams is one of the greatest composers of all time, film or otherwise. He's a genius of tone, genre, and melody. His ability to immediately capture the feeling behind a story is pretty much second to none. He walks a lonely road, the only road that he has ever known. When he first brought the theme song of Jaws to the young director, Spielberg thought it was a joke. After all, how could you capture an audience in just 2 simple notes? Close Encounters of the Third Kind is sort of a spiritual sibling to E.T., which we all know is just a cheap knockoff of Mac and Me. But Close Encounters is incredible. Again, the music is genius, but in this one it's a lot more diegetic, meaning it comes from the movie itself rather than an added soundtrack.
A what?
Williams switches seamlessly between the music in the movie and his non-diegetic score. I swear to God, if that autocorrects to diabetic one more time.
Well, I guess you've noticed something that's a little strange with Dad.
There's a really cool clip from inside the actor studio with James Lipton speaking to Spielberg about his personal interpretation of that film.
Your father was a computer scientist. Your mother was a musician. When the spaceship lands, how do they communicate?
That's a very good question. I like that. And you see, I'd love to say, you know, I intended that and I realized that was my mother and father, but not until this moment.
Subtext in art can often be discovered by the viewer in places where the creator didn't even realize it was there. Jordan Peele, for example, claims he didn't have Rose separate the milk from the cereal and Get Out as symbolism for segregation, but to show she's just a crazy-ass bitch. Now let's knock out two of the best on this side of the century. The Fabelmans, which I mentioned was my favorite in 20 years, and of course he's made plenty of solid films in between. I just don't think any of them, including his most recent, have lived up to his last true masterpiece. Catch Me If You Can. Spielberg does a fantastic job of telling the wild, true story
Allegedly.
of Frank Abagnale Jr., played by a young Leonardo DiCaprio. The movie is both story and character-driven, and the story is driven by the character, which is why it's so damn entertaining. The jazzy spy thriller soundtrack is yet another testament to the genius of John Williams, and the opening credits is one of my favorites of all time. The movie is non-stop fun all the way through. The scene where Abagnale manages to convince Hanratty, who's been after him the entire movie, that he's actually FBI is an all-time classic. Hanks had him dead to rights, and he still got away.
Mind if I see some identification?
Now, The Fabelmans was incredibly personal to Spielberg in many ways that are apparent when you watch the movie. He did a great job in casting. Gabriel LaBelle absolutely crushed the role. And, of course, Michelle Williams and Paul Dano were brilliant as always. And Seth Rogen, frankly, gave his best performance since Observe and Report. And this movie's another perfect example of how a filmmaker can see something his whole life, then capture it on film and see it in an entirely new way. That was sort of the idea behind the movie. Sammy is able to understand aspects of his family and his childhood that he didn't understand until he sees it through the lens of his camera. In conclusion, Spielzy is one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. He's got a gift for directing that you don't see every day. His partnership with his cinematographers Dean Cundy, Janusz Kaminski, writers like David Koepp, Tony Kushner, Lawrence Kasdan, these are all vital pieces of the beautiful puzzle that lands on our local theater screens when we're lucky enough to get another taste of the genius of the great Steven Spielberg. At some point I'll do a full ranking of all of Spielberg's movies, and I have seen all of them. But what I am going to do next is a ranking of all 13 of Stanley Kubrick's films. So let me know in the comments if you want to see that, and I'll get right on it. Thanks for watching, remember to subscribe, and if you got to the end of the video, tell me your favorite Spielberg film in the comments and I'll give you a shout out on the next one.